Welcome everyone to the Rise podcast. Kwesi Millington here. I'm here with my guest today, Dr. Stephanie Conn, and I'll read her introduction and then we'll get into it. Dr. Stephanie Conn is a former police officer as well as the daughter and wife of police officers, and is a licensed psychologist at her practice, First Responder Psychology in Portland, Oregon, specializing in first responder stress, trauma, work identity, coping, and resilience. She supports first responder agencies with CISM, peer support, and mental health training. She is the clinical director of Public Safety Assistance Network, a group of culturally competent clinicians who provide services to public safety agencies and assist in vetting clinicians for agencies in need. She has presented widely to first responders, sharing wisdom gained from her police experience, her research, and her therapy practice. She is the author of Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel. You are probably the most educated guest I've had on the podcast. You're an expert in resilience. You have a background of being a first responder. I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I don't know if you reached out, I reached out to you or you reached out to me. The bottom line is we connected. I read your book. It's amazing. I brought it up in my own training on resilience. When I've talked to first responders, I've had people say, yes, I know that book. I read it. It's a great book. So I'm delighted to have you on the podcast to share your wisdom with me and my listeners, because I like to learn as much about resilience, especially from people like you who have not only walked the path, but studied and have the degrees behind you. So thank you and welcome. Thank you for being on here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So first, actually, I just want to talk about, tell me a bit about your background and how you went from the first responder world to the medical profession and why you did that.
Yeah, that's an easy one for me. I mean, I grew up, my dad was an officer for almost 40 years. And, and then going from dispatch to being an officer. When I was an officer, we had one of my coworkers was shot and killed in the line of duty. And we had a police psychologist at the time that was a sworn member that understood us, that worked with the negotiation team, with the peer support team, was a trusted member that really understood the challenges that we faced as police officers. And a year later, one of my other coworkers, Dwayne, was killed in the line of duty, and we had a change from the police psychologist to a city psychologist who didn't have a background, who didn't have training in it, who didn't have relationships built with the membership, with the police members. And so it was glaring when she was doing the crisis mobilization briefing for Dwayne's death, just hours from the time of his death. And I'm being a good peer support team member in the back of the room, and I'm just kind of surveying the room, who will I make contact with, and I'm just kind of noticing this rumbling, like, who's this stranger in our house? We've never met this person. She's not familiar with this. And so she asked me to take over the crisis mobilization briefing, which I did. And then I found that it was really hard as a peer support team member after that. When people talked to me about the challenges that they were having, it was really hard for me to get them to take a referral to a clinician that didn't understand their work. And I even had someone said, please meet with me and my wife. I trust you because you get it. And you seem to know what you're doing as a peer supporter, and tried to pay me under the table for doing counseling for them. And I said, no, I'm not qualified to do counseling, and that you deserve so much more than what I'm able to offer. But he wouldn't take a referral. And so as I'm looking for people that specialized in working with first responders, I didn't really find them. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go to a counseling program and become qualified to be able to I wouldn't obviously be able to work with my own peers because of the dual relationship, but I'll be able to fill this gap that's so glaringly obvious. And once I finished my degree and said, hey, here's who I am and what I do in my background, again, still full intentions of returning to policing. When I was finished with my degree, there's been no way. It has been so busy. The demand has been so high that I've never been able to return to policing since jumping into the counseling psychology world.
Okay. So many questions popped up out of that. And I want to know, first of all, what was your path? And for someone, I'll just be honest, like myself, who maybe wants to follow that path, what did you start with as far as education goes? I know you have a lot of degrees you've taken, but where did you start and take us across that path or along that path? What did you do?
Well, I mean, I haven't before. I mean, when I was a cop, I had a Master of Science in Criminal Justice, and I took a lot of courses that had a lot of ologies at the end of them. Victimology, criminal psychology, that kind of stuff. So I kind of understood some of the ology, sociology, that kind of business. But then when I left policing to get my degree, I did a master's, Master of Arts in Counseling, and then I jumped in and did a PhD in counseling. And my doctorate is from University of British Columbia in Vancouver, as you know. And I had kind of the dream team when I did my doctorate, because I chose one professor who was his area of expertise was on career issues, so career identity and career decision making and these kinds of things. The other, her specialty was trauma, so she really understood secondary trauma, primary trauma. And the third person, his specialization was working in first responders and military. So I was like, man, I just kind of picked the dream team between people that understood career issues and trauma issues and first responder issues. And so, and then I did my doctoral dissertation on what else? Police identity, and how their police identity is oftentimes threatened by the job, and how people manage to maintain that identity outside of the job despite shift work and the public trying to pull you into your police role or that kind of stuff. So that's what I did. But my formal education really is just that. It's the formal education. I think my real education came from the merging of my experience with some textbook learning, with a lot of training on trauma, and a lot of reading about and working with first responders. And so I think really that's where the wisdom comes in versus the education.
And I think that's probably what makes, I don't know how other psychologists do with first responders, but I imagine a lot of people probably gravitate to you because of that background. Because I know that as a former police officer, I had to see a psychologist for my own mental issues, but there's still a lot of hesitancy towards that. And someone like yourself who has the background, I imagine if someone had a choice between someone who didn't have the background and yourself, do we need more people like you in the first responder field who actually have the background? Do you think that would actually bridge the gap between officers who don't necessarily want help?
Huge. It would be huge. And that's the thing, is I have the blessing currently of working with people at the national level, the state and the national level, on how to vet clinicians and on identifying culturally competent in terms of, the workplace culture, first responder culture. I have the privilege of being able to work with some of these national organizations to identify these clinicians. And then what's even cooler, if that's a word, is that I have a lot of people that have a 20, 25, 30-year career as a first responder, who say, I now am going into counseling. And I'm hearing that day after day after day. I mean, I was doing training the other day locally, semi-locally, a couple hours away. And there's a cop in the class who says, I'm finishing my counseling degree now. And then I'm talking to someone earlier today that says, hey, and I hired a firefighter that's in his 23rd year of being a firefighter, who's now a clinician. And so it's a very common thing for people to transition from first responder service into counseling first responders, because like myself, they also see the value added of having that background. But then I have other people that may not have that background personally, but they came from that family, or they have a good friend. They're just like, I didn't know how hard it was to do that job. I want to help those people. And so they're trying to bring themselves up to speed on the first responder culture, because they already have the clinical skills. So
yeah, I think marrying the two is going to be huge, and we're going to hopefully see the effects as the years go on, as more officers, I think, need to talk to someone. I mean, what's your thoughts on the need for people in the first responder world, police officers, et cetera, to see someone? Do you think it's something that everyone should do because of what they see, or is it a case-by-case basis?
I think I think it depends on what your threshold is. And so my threshold is a lot lower than the average person's threshold. And it's not because I'm trying to line my pockets or fill my office. I'm plenty busy. It isn't that. But it's because I see people who have waited 15 years to address an issue, and we are now having to work 3 times as hard because they're addressing it after the fact, after it's become a problem for them and it's really started to become entrenched. And if we had addressed it initially, they don't have to actually get to the issue to the degree that it's a problem to benefit from counseling, right? If you think about it, and I draw a lot of parallels to physical ailments, because I think the stigma is not there for the physical ailments, and it makes a lot of sense. If I had, my knee kept swelling and I kept having a hard time putting weight on that knee, I'm not waiting till I'm just about immobilized to where I really can't even do it anymore. At the first sign I start to feel that kind of stitch of pain in my knee, if I go do something about it, if I do some physical therapy and I strengthen whatever I need to do, or I get some anti-inflammatory stuff, it's going to keep me from having to have a painful surgery sometime later and arthritis and all this other kind of business. Well, psychological stuff is the same way. If I get ahead of it, the relationship issue, the mindset issue, the trauma issue, if I get ahead of it, the work is it's actually pretty easy to get through it. Relatively speaking, of course, versus something that's gotten so entrenched and so inflamed that it's actually started the mechanics of the way I walk. And I tell people, when I do EMDR and do trauma treatment, it's like I'm working on that right knee. But if you've been guarding it for 15 years, all the mechanics of how you walk are going to be different from 15 years of guarding that knee injury. Well, the same thing happens with a psychological injury. 15 years of narrowing who you'll come in contact with and how you see the world and this kind of stuff takes a lot. It's a lot more work to change that after it's become so, swollen.
Yeah, mentally swollen. And I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I totally believe in seeking help. But what do you say to, what are the signs then, I guess, for someone that needs to address it early? And to use the metaphor of the swollen knee, you can feel the physical pain, but what are some signs that you can see that will allow you to get ahead of anything that might be happening down the road? So what are the first signs that someone should say, okay, I think I need to talk to someone?
Well, and it's very complicated because it's like asking a fish to notice the water around it, right? It's so, especially when life is busy. So I think some of it is little things like, has your sleep started to become affected? Are you starting to have a delay in falling asleep? Or are you having a hard time staying asleep, like maintaining sleep? Asking others if you've changed, right? So that's the thing, is people don't oftentimes ask their significant others if they've changed, but man, when they do they ever get hit with a shocking feedback? Said, yeah, you used to be nice, now you're a jerk. You used to talk all the time, now you're always withdrawn or you're on your phone. So I think kind of noticing, hey, and I have an annual check-in that I have people do, because I think it's just good to, forewarned is forearmed, is it asks questions. What's your view of mankind? How do you finish the following statements? I am, people are, the world is. And if your statements are not very positive, or they've got some expletives in there, you might not be very, it might be time to check in. And then again, it's this, what are your values? Are you in fact living according to your values? And you don't have to have some kind of pathology. You don't have to have some kind of mental health issue to not be living a life that's full of flourishing and meaning. You can just, say my family's important, but you're spending all your time at work. And that's not really living your life well. So I think I think there's wellness tools or self-reflection tools like what I'm talking about, and I'm happy to share it, and you can share it with whoever you want to, that gets us kind of taking a look inside and figuring out if we are living life as we want to.
Now, this check-in that you give, I am, the world is that something you give to officers before they see you or after they start to see you?
Well, I don't even do that necessarily with with clients per se as much as I do it, give it to people when I do resilience training, because when I'm therapizing with folks, I'm asking, the foundational things like, how are you spending your time? Who do you spend your time with? What do you think the impact of the work is? Because sadly, a lot of times by the time they get to me, they don't, there's no real self-reflection that's needed. It's glaring at this point. They're like, okay, I'm starting to get feedback from my spouse that if I don't go to therapy, we're done. Or my coworkers have told me I'm an a-hole now. And I kind of always knew I was because I had an edge, but now I'm just becoming unbearable. So I don't even necessarily use that tool, although I give it to clients and say, now you need to continuously monitor as you go back into your world and we're not working together anymore, because you need to remain aware of how you're doing and how you want to be doing.
Okay. And the reason I asked if you give it to beforehand, because then that might be a check-in for people to say, okay, I'm answering these questions in a certain way, I need to see someone. But that's something that they probably, I guess, fill in once they see you, or I guess as part of a training program. I want to ask you a question that someone asked me recently. They asked, I want to see someone about, my mental health. I want to seek help, but I'm worried about the chances that I'm not going to be promoted, or people are going to notice, or, I'm going to be ostracized because I sought help. How do I navigate that road? And so I want to ask you how you'd answer that question.
Well, that's a no-brainer to me, because the confidentiality of what I do is on par with that of an attorney. Now, obviously it can vary from province to province or state to state, but I practiced in Canada and I practice here in the US now, and it's on par. No employer has a right to know the content of any of the session, or coworkers or supervisors or anyone in the workplace. They have no right to know that, and I have no ability to tell them any of that unless the client gives me written consent and says, will you talk to my supervisor or give a letter to my supervisor because I need an adjusted schedule. And that specific request for me to communicate with the employer has to be given to me in writing, and then explicitly what I can and cannot disclose. And so anybody's concern that having counseling can interfere with their ability to promote is way misguided, because if anything, it would enhance their ability to promote, because I'm going to talk to them about how certain things, things like exercise and then studying for promotional exam. When you exercise, you secrete your what they call brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is basically miracle growth for the brain. So you're growing these neurons, and then you turn around and study within a 90-minute window of that. It helps the neurons maintain, and it actually enhances your learning. So if anything, they would learn how to learn better, and I'd be teaching them skills on interpersonal effectiveness and interview behaviors, and quelling any nervousness on doing examinations or any of that kind of stuff, or interview panels. It would do nothing but enhance their ability to promote, not take away from it.
And I think they need more of that knowledge, like what you were saying about BDNF and exercise, because they don't even think about, a lot of officers I know that I've spoken to, they don't even think about the content of what's discussed being disclosed. They think, oh, I'm seeing someone. As soon as I'm someone who sees a psychologist, I may not be tough enough, or strong enough, or I may be taking extra time off. So we should give the promotion to someone who doesn't need to take any time off, or has seen things and has been able to tough through it. Is that mentality disappearing as you're seeing it, or is it still out there? I'm laughing. I find it just as humorous. I'm just saying that that's what I'm hearing. Some people say.
Yeah, it's such a silly thing, because and I know the culture, and I know how that culture, how the culture is. All day long, I'd rather promote the person or have the person work for me that's gone and taken care of their business than hasn't taken care of their business, because it's the ones that aren't taking care of their business, aren't taking care of their health, their mindset, their, sleep issues or whatever. They're the ones that are the liability. They're the ones that are going to be the mess. They're the ones that are going to have a harder time, is the people that don't confront the issue. So if, again, it's, coming back to the analogy of the knee injury, I want the guy or the gal whose knee is strong, whose muscles around that knee is strong, and knows the mechanics of how they need to walk through something very difficult, because they're going to fare a whole lot better than that person that says, you know what, I'm just going to take a whole bunch of ibuprofen or, some heavy duty pain medication, i.e. alcohol, whatever we're talking about here, and I'm just going to hobble on through, because that person is not going to be any good to others, because they're actually, I just can't even imagine them being able to carry anybody out of anything, any firefight, if they aren't strong. And I think it takes, I think it also takes a lot of strength to go and be humble enough to say, I'm going to take care of my business, whether it's psychological or physiological or whatever it is. That takes a strong person.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And I'm hoping that the culture is going to change eventually. When it comes to, I guess, resilience, you specialize obviously in first responder world, but how about some general broad-based tips for building resilience? And we talked about this being building resilience in a chaotic world, and that's for anybody. We are in a chaotic world. Mm-hmm. What are some of, if you were to say, okay, what are my top 2 or 3 tips for building resilience? I know your book has a ton of excellent knowledge, but what would be the main places to start when it comes for anybody building resilience, especially in times like these?
Well, I mean, I take 3 kind of overarching categories, and one's health, one's relationships, and one is your mindset. So in terms of health, it seems kind of silly, but if you're not getting good sleep, they use sleep deprivation to get people to tell national secrets. It breaks you emotionally, physically, mentally, everything, right? So it seems kind of silly, but get on whatever you got to do to get good sleep, meaning, see a doctor, figure out what's going wrong with your sleep hygiene or those kinds of things. Talk to a sleep specialist that can help you get that squared away. Little silly things like all the benefits of exercise. I know it's, exercising isn't going to make people stop protesting here or stop, doing something there, that kind of business. No, but your ability to handle the stress and you discharging all this kind of pent up energy and this kind of angst and fight, flight, and stress hormones is all going to be improved by exercise. So when I talk about health and I do my annual check-ins, I'm like, how's your sleep? How's your nutrition? How's your exercise? How's your spiritual health, if that's a component of your life? And then I move on to the next thing, which is, okay, how's your relationships in home? Like, are you treating them like bank accounts where you put deposits so that you can make withdrawals when stuff goes wrong and you need some help? Or are you always making withdrawals or barely even nickeling and diming those kind of emotional bank accounts so you can't ever make a withdrawal? How are your relationships in the workplace? How are your relationships in the community? So what can you do to start kind of fortifying those and taking care of those relationships? And then the third is your mindset. And this is a conversation I was having today as I was talking with cops this morning at a diffusing that I was doing. And, they're just like, this is wrong and that is wrong. So I'm not saying anything that's confidential in this setting, but I'm like, I agree. But what can you control? Because I have a 2-pronged approach when it comes down to this stuff. And it's just like, is what you're talking about, what you're complaining about, or what the problem you're, thinking of, is it accurate? And in some cases, it's not accurate. They're saying, I think I screwed up. And then they actually investigated. They didn't screw up. They just feared that they did, and so on and so forth. Okay. But if it isn't, if whatever they're talking about is actually happening and it's true and they're seeing it like it really is, it's accurate, then the next prong, the next question you need to be asking yourself, okay, is it helpful to think about it? And sometimes it is helpful to think about it. It's like, okay, how do we solve this issue? How do we address this complication in the workplace or this complication at home? But sometimes and oftentimes it's not helpful to continuously think about this unsolvable problem. So then I say, okay, so if it isn't helpful, even if it's accurate that it's truly a problem, he's got all this anti-police sentiment, no one's disputing that, but it's not helpful to think about it. What would be helpful? What can you do? What can you focus on? What do you need to lean into? Because you're adding suffering to pain when you just keep looping on a problem that's unsolvable.
I love it. And are you finding that people are able to release some of that? Because I know it's easy to say, accept what you can't change and focus on what you can. What are some practices people can do to remind themselves of that? Because it's almost like the serenity prayer, right? God give me the serenity, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. It's been there for years, but people still do it. They still focus on those things they can't control. And how do we remind ourselves then to do that on a daily basis? Is there cues that we can do? I don't know if that's the right way to ask it.
Yeah. Just tattoo it on your arm. Tattoo the serenity prayer or be here now, or you're right. You've just got all this wisdom on your arm. No, I mean, there is something to be said for one, is maybe and I've told people, dispatchers that are just like sitting there at the console and they're just like, I can't control that. So I say, get a sticky note, put the sticky note on the console in front of you with just kind of abbreviations, be here now, or, not my circus, not my monkeys, or whatever it is. So when you look at that sticky, that's right there. It reminds you, no, I can't do that. I can't go there. Right. Mm-hmm. If you're not sitting at a place where you're going to be able to look at a sticky note or those kinds of things, then you have to come to associate anytime you go into this place, or you start to notice this kind of physical feeling of anxiety, or this kind of gut wrenching or heart wrenching feeling that you're having, that you're to ask yourself a reflection question. What am I reacting to? And then the next part is, can I control it or can't I? And then the next thing is you need to almost have predetermined, because telling yourself to not think about something is saying, don't picture the pink elephant. Boom, everybody pictures the pink elephant. It just seems really stupid. So instead you have to say, what will I think about when I start to go towards thinking about that kind of stuff? And predetermine, hey, when I have this kind of downtime, when I start being frustrated or thinking about stuff that I can't fix, here's 2 or 3 things I'm going to focus on instead. One, okay, that's not doing the job for me today. All right, what's another thing I can get focused on, or I can do that, that might be more engaging, that might do the trick for me to kind of, that has a bit more stickiness in the Velcro, so to speak.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about something else you said. I heard you say it in another interview, and I wanted to know, as a doctor, you said pills don't build skills. And I love that. I love the rhyme. It's stuck in my head. Where does medication fit within your practice, and what advice do you give that to anyone? Because obviously sometimes it's necessary, but you don't want to overdo it. Where's your line on that?
Yeah, and I'm not a physician. I'm a psychologist, so I can't prescribe medication, and I can't even get a medical opinion.
Was on that, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I do have that phrase that I use: pills don't build skills, and I stand by that, because the truth of it is that, case in point, a lot of first responders have trouble with sleep. And if you give a person sleep medication, they're sedating themselves. They're not actually sleeping, they're sedated. They're not getting restorative sleep. You stop taking the medication, boom, the insomnia comes right back as fast, if not faster than it came in the first place. And so it's not actually changing anything. When maybe what's going on for you that's causing you to not be able to fall asleep or sustain sleep is that you drink caffeine too close to bedtime, or you're staying too ratcheted up mentally, or you're not taking care of your body and your nervous system to take it down. So if instead of you just taking a pill to manage symptoms, you made some kind of changes to change the source of the problem, then it makes symptom control obsolete. And so can you change something in that? Or let's just say it's something else like anxiety. You have panic attacks every time you go to this location or encounter this person or what have you. What if instead you figured out, I don't actually need that medication to calm the panic attack if I sit and I distracting myself so that I can then start, calming down just enough that I can start using some breathing. And then that works just a little bit better so that I can do something else, so that I can start accessing my thinking a little bit better. Then lo and behold, you don't need that medication anymore, because you have built some other skills through sitting with something that's uncomfortable but not dangerous, to be able to practice a skill. It's almost like, in some respects, and sorry if I lose people with all the analogies and metaphors, but I can look at a weight stack and say, okay, I don't know that I can lift that one, but I can lift it a little bit, or I can lift it with some assistance, or I can lift a one that's a little bit less. I'm going to keep working to where I can lift that really big one. Or I can just say, no, I'm going to just, use this other person to get it for me, or use this other piece of equipment to lift it for me. You'll never be able to lift it if you don't incrementally work towards building that muscle. And the same thing is with emotion regulation, with your mindset. Some of our anxiety actually comes from our way of thinking. So it's never going to go away if you don't change the way you think.
Absolutely. I almost think that a doctor should give a prescription with a psychologist recommendation too, because if you just give the medication, then you're not addressing any of the things that you talked about, right? It's almost like, okay, here's the pill, but how do we address the skill that is going to cause you not to need the pill anymore? So
Right. Yeah, I mean, truly, and that's the thing, is there's been times, and again, I try to stay in my lane here, where a person is so keyed up, so anxious, so sleep is so bad that they sometimes need some assistance through their physician to get their ability to tolerate certain, things in treatment or this kind of stuff. That I'm like, great. So let's just use that for the time being while we're building this skill. So now it's almost like you're being spotted while you're lifting the weight, versus, you're just trying to lift it all on your own. But eventually the spotter needs to step back and the person needs to lift the weight. So eventually the medication needs to recede so the person can do what they've now been training to do.
I love the fitness metaphors, by the way, because I love fitness. So I'm with you all the way with every single fitness metaphor you've mentioned. Talk to me about secondary traumatic STS. I think you call it STS, secondary traumatic stress. I hadn't heard of that term, of it explained until I read your book. So explain what that is. Yeah,
and it's been used interchangeably, with vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue, which is not really the same thing, but this isn't a lecture, so I won't go into the nuances in those. But basically, first responders have primary traumas, which are someone is trying to kill them, or there's, or they're going into a fire, going into a structure where the fire may get them, right? So those are kind of the primary traumas. Now, secondary trauma is that death by 1,000 cuts that Ellen Kirschman talks about, where you're constantly going to see the traumatization of other people. So you're responding to the dead kid calls, or to the domestic violence, with the person with their eyes swollen shut, or you're going and constantly seeing the suffering of other people, and seeing that takes a toll on people, and it starts to cause them to fear for their own safety, and to have all kinds of post-traumatic responses, because now they have the intrusive images of this dead kid call earlier, when they go home and try to hug their own child, and the face of the child that they just left, on a call hours ago, boom, pops up. Or they start to have nightmares about, not being able to save kids, or this kind of business, or adults and the like. And so it causes the post-traumatic stress symptoms from seeing other people. And it's such a commonplace thing in the first responder field that they actually added chronic exposure to the death of others in the diagnosis manual for first responders.
Okay. Okay. And I should ask, do you see people outside of the first responder world? What is your,
No.
is this all first responders? Okay.
Yeah, I have maybe 3 people that are not first responders that I've seen off and on for a number of years. And so I still see them. I'm not going to just say, oh, I don't work with you people anymore, right? I'm going to still support them. But yeah, 99% of mine clients are first responders.
And is that because you're so busy you couldn't take on anybody else, or do you want to stay just with first responders and that's by choice?
No, it's absolutely by choice. It's absolutely by choice. Because I mean, again, kind of true to my purpose of changing fields in the first place was to fill that gap for first responders. And so there, the 2 or 3 people that I have left that are not first responders, I started working with them soon after I moved to this area, and I had not established the connection or made the, with the agency. So I was like, okay, if I'm not, seeing first responders who don't have those relationships established, I'll see other people with trauma. And so, yeah, that's why I have 2 or 3 people left.
And I wanted to ask you a kind of like, I guess, a bigger picture question. You started as a first responder. You didn't see people that had the background that were able to help, and that's what got you into the field. You've seen the way the first responder world has gone, especially in the past couple of years. Do you have like a bigger picture of what you'd like to see happen, or where you'd like to see the profession go, as far as, this is my part, this is why I started, this is what I'd like to see 10 years down the road? Have you thought about that kind of bigger picture question?
Yeah, I think about it all the time. In fact, I've already had 3 meetings today about it. So yeah, and I'm overhauling a local agency's wellness program where I'm saying, okay, the days of us being reactive and saying, okay, when a critical incident occurs, here's what we do. But we actually need to front load resilience. I want peer supporters, and I use the word peer supporters instead of critical incident stress management team, as I want them to be resilience ninjas. I want them to be so well versed in understanding how to train their peers, do roll call trainings or briefings or these kinds of things on how to get better sleep and nutrition and exercise and improving communications at home and how to do transition to home and that kind of stuff. That and it's a philosophy that I have, is I want to work myself out of a job on the back end of things because I'm working really hard on the front end of things, fortifying peer supporters, helping agencies to do better by taking care of their employees. Because a lot of times, and I've had this question asked of me, one of my former captains, who's now the chief at my dad's old department, says, hey, Stephanie, how do we do a better job, hiring screening officers that are going to stay in the job and that aren't going to have problems and aren't going to go off on stress leave and this kind of stuff. And I told him, I said, Dean, you're asking the wrong question. It's not an issue that we're not screening people well enough. It's not like we're getting bad apples on the job. We actually have bruised apples on the job. And sometimes we have green apples on the job that lack experience or training or mentorship. So we need to do a better job of mentoring and training them, not screening them, but mentoring and training the green apples. And then we need to take care of the bruised apples, because that's really where the problems are lying, not the bad apples that we failed to filter out. And so, the big picture in my mind is, one, clinicians not just sitting in their office waiting for people to show up that have problems, but actually getting out, as I did this morning, and going to the station and spending time with people and showing that we're not all mentals, those of us in the mental health profession, and sitting elbow to elbow with people as COVIDly responsible as possible, and giving people information where they are. And I think we need to be doing more of that, and we need to be doing more wellness checks that are really just not because there's a problem, but just to establish a relationship in case there ever is a problem.
I think you put it perfectly, front loading resilience. That one just stuck in my head, like get resilience into resilience and wellness training into these departments before they get to a point that they need you down the road. And you're part of that front loading as well too, or are you training staff to do that in the initial stages or in the early parts of careers?
Both. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing recruit trainings now. In fact, here in June, I think I'm doing police identity disorder training at the training center for the recruits. Just saying, hey, there's going to be a tendency for you to start narrowing your identity and to stop doing things you normally would enjoy and this kind of stuff. So I'm doing some training on that, but I'm also training peer supporters for the more senior people. The people that I saw today were anywhere between 2 and 23 years in, I think was the kind of the range of experience of the folks I saw this morning. So I'm working on me being there, kind of front loading people, but also multiplying the message by fortifying peer supporters and other people to really kind of spread this resilience, this proactive resilience and this mindset around. Because truly, even though I get some buy-in because I was a cop, I'm not currently a cop. And so they want to hear it from their people that are currently doing their job in their department, to the left and to the right. That means more to them than it does the letters behind my name. Truly, it does.
Yeah. And that being said, I still think we need more of you people who have the experience in both areas. Before we finish up, I want to ask, I'm seeing a lot of officers retiring, and you may be seeing that leaving early. I think New Jersey has something called a burnout bill where you can leave the career early now. We're probably at a time more than at any point where officers are leaving early or recruitment is low. What do you say to build morale in, I guess, officers that are not seeing people coming in to help them and they're overworked at work, or they just said, you know what, it's too stressful right now, I want to quit. What do you say to those officers now, especially the times we're in?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And my answer feels like I'm giving them a nickel, because basically I'm saying, just hold on, just breathe, just wait. These are very difficult times, and you might be feeling an urge to just jump out of the water because the water's too hot and you feel like you're being boiled alive. But in my mind, good will prevail. And again, perhaps I'm naive in this respect, but people will come back around and recognize and see the value in what officers offer their communities. I think it's already starting to happen in locations across the nation, where people started to be really hard on police, and then they started to go, oh wait, when they back up and they start leaving in droves, crime rates escalate to unprecedented levels. Let's refund police, right? And so let's. Oh wait a minute, I didn't realize it was that was that big of an issue. And so I think we have to kind of let this stuff breathe and let things kind of settle down, and common sense will prevail eventually, and they will be glad that they stuck through very difficult times and will hopefully still remain connected to a noble profession, and will remain connected to their purpose in a noble profession. One of the talks that I give, and I gave it a couple of times last week, is I end the Resilience Day with the parable of the snake. And if we have a moment, I'll quickly share it with you. A man sees a burning brush, and in this burning brush, he sees the snake. Well, in the brush, and in being an animal lover, he cannot bear to see this snake suffer. So just instinctively, he just reaches in and grabs the snake. And as he does, the snake turns around and bites him in the arm. And he's excruciating pain. So he just opens his hand, and the snake drops back down into the burning bush. Well, he still can't bear to see the snake suffer. So he goes and gets a stick, and he gets the snake out of the bush and sets it safely to the side. Well, a person watches this whole thing unfold and says, what are you doing? I mean, oh my God, look at your arm. It's so swollen. Why would you just continue to try to help this snake, even though it bit you in the arm? And the man said, the snake did what its nature is to do. Its nature is to bite. My nature is to help. I'm not going to let what its nature is change what my nature is. That's a choice. And that's what I tell people, is that you will be bitten, and you might be bitten over and over and over again. And it's a choice for you to let go and walk away and do something that's not consistent with who you are and your values as a person. Or you can say, I'm not going to let someone else's bite change who I am and what's important to me. And that is a choice.
I love it. I might have to borrow that parable. I love it. I love stories. You told it so well, and it's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate what you do. I'm in Canada. The numbers aren't quite the same up here, but the attitude is kind of the same. So I appreciate what you do. And before we close, tell people where they can find you, where they can get your amazing book, and how they can connect with you. And also, if you do virtual sessions, if someone in Canada, per se, is looking to hire you.
Yeah. I've actually, before COVID, flown up to Canada still and do some training. I have dual citizenship, so I can zip back and forth pretty easily. Although not recently with COVID, but yeah, so I mean, firstresponderpsychology.com is my website. And so information for the training that I offer and my background is there. My book, Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel, is on Amazon.ca, as well as Amazon.com for those listening in the US. And so it's available there. And I believe Routledge, in Canada, also offers bulk orders, discounts and things like that, just like they do here in the US. They've got a North American person there. Yeah, and then I don't do Twitter, but I have a Facebook and LinkedIn. And so from time to time, I will post stuff relating to officer wellness or those kinds of things. Yeah, virtual trainings, I do those all the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast. I gained so much knowledge and value, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.